I'm pleased to serve as moderator for our distinguished panel of health IT experts, Roger Baker and Anish Chopra. The Honorable Roger Baker was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate in 2009 to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology for the Department of Veterans Affairs. As an Assistant Secretary, he was Chief Information Officer for the department until his departure in 2013. He directly managed an organization of over 7,500 individuals who have incredible background in information technology and a budget of over $3.3 billion. Roger is currently Chief Strategy Officer for technology firm Agilex. The Honorable Anish Chopra was the nation's first Chief Technology Officer, serving as an assistant to President Obama. He designed the National Wireless Initiative, helped launch Startup America, and executed an open innovation strategy across the government built on private sector collaboration. Anish is currently the co-founder and executive vice president of HIMSS Analytics, a startup focused on using data analytics to improve the productivity of public and regulated sectors of the economy. And he has a new book out this month, Innovative State: How New Technologies Can Transform Government. It's an honor to have you both with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Today we're going to be discussing the value of health IT, how health IT enables better quality at lower cost, and how federal efforts such as meaningful use are serving as catalysts to harness the power of health IT through the use of clinical and business intelligence, lessons learned, and the ability to engage patients in their own health care. We'll also talk about progress towards health information exchange, a common thread to facilitate an improved healthcare system. So let's begin by discussing the big picture of health IT. I'd like to begin by giving each of you an opportunity to share from your own unique perspective what you see as the great challenges and opportunities for health IT. Roger, as a major player in information technology development at the VA in your previous position, what do you see as health IT's role in healthcare transformation? How is health IT supporting high-quality care for our nation's veterans and their families, and where do we need to focus our attention?
So my favorite way of thinking about where health IT needs to go is to think about sensors and to think about all the new technology that's coming out that's going to generate a ton of information about the individual, what the individual's doing, how the individual's body is performing, how their mind is performing. And if you think about all of that data and how it can be used to the benefit of the individual, whether it's to help them from the health standpoint, help them from just the interest standpoint. I love looking at all the new things that are coming out for the mobile devices and then fusing that data in. But, healthcare is quickly becoming a study in populations and not just the individual. And so you think about how do you bring that information then back? So, yeah, I've got an iPhone that measures my heartbeat, or I've got an iFit, or something along those lines, and I use that for what I'm doing as an individual. But if you think of every individual as a sensor in the overall population health of the country, of the world, how do those things fit together, and how does health IT bring that information together, both from a turning it into something useful, and then from an analytics, and what does it tell us about things? So you'd love to be able to track all the various outbreaks in the population and give people great advice on how to avoid, whether it's influenza or colds or whatever. I mean, could you see, the daily health map along with the daily weather map? It's going to rain in Virginia today, and if you're in Fairfax County, you might want to avoid people that are sneezing because there's a nasty bug going around. Right. So I think if you look forward into that, there's nothing that we care more about, I think, than our health individually. And I think we'll just see a lot more progress in utilizing those technologies and those analytics and the data that's coming out of those things to help us look at it from both an individual and population health perspective, and that's all of that is just underpinned by health IT.
It's an interesting perspective, and with school children, it would be nice to be able to wake up in the morning and be able to interact with the school nurse or something to that matter.
Or as a parent, it turns out that 3/4 of the kids in your child's second grade class have the flu today. Are you going to send him or her, or are you going to keep him home?
Right.
Those sort of things that would let you make some decisions along those lines with informed versus finding out a week later that your kid's got the flu because 3/4 of the kids in the class have the flu.
It's very compelling. Anish, what's working in health IT? You've long been a big proponent of opening up government data and bringing in private sector to put all the big data to use. How are you seeing it play out in healthcare?
Well, the great news is if we take a step back, we had some hypotheses about the potential, and now they're being proven out in reality as we see the results of the various programs that have been put in place. As a nice transition from Roger, early in our tenure together, the VA had commissioned a study understanding the value of health IT into its cost and operational performance. And an external review, I think it was by Professor Middleton, had actually taken a look and said that there's $3 billion annually savings achieved into the VA on account of the performance improvements powered by information technology. And I might separate these theses into two areas. One is what's been done to help the visits allow for patients to have better care in a visit. And the second is what's happening to help patients in between visits help to make better decisions. So when we first started on this journey, I would say that a good deal of the focus and attention was to provide all the information possible to the caregiver at the time the patient presented, asking questions that perhaps may not be in the direct domain of the caregiver and the conversation that's being had. A dermatologist seeing a patient may not naturally look to see their blood pressure, but in the story of that patient's journey or how they're dealing with their chronic conditions, having that knowledge about the fact that their blood pressure has a history of not being under control, now in the hands of that dermatologist might be prompting some further questions that may not be specific about the skin rash, but important to deal with the conditions for that patient. So bringing more decision support into the practice had been a big part of the initial hypothesis for the value of health IT. And we're seeing a number of these examples play out. In addition to the VA study, we've seen countless examples in organizations where we've seen a reduction in errors and challenges associated with suboptimal information at the point in the visit. But now we're starting to see evidence that say what happens after the visit and whether or not information technology can be harnessed to make sure that we're taking care of folks in between their healthcare needs. And just this week, we've seen reports that readmission rates have fallen precipitously in the several years since we've seen new payment models that actually incentivize attention paid in between the visit. So you've discharged from the hospital, and what previously was sort of a good luck and here's some discharge instructions has now become how do we harness information technology to figure out which of you is likely to be returning and what might we do to make that probability of your return fall. All of that information technology, human capital, and new business models emerging on account of the fact that we've seen a little bit of a payment incentive, and the results have been dramatic, literally double-digit rates of decline in the readmission rate, especially for those avoidable readmissions that we've been talking about. So health information technology had initially been hypothesized to make value in the course of better care decision support in the moment, and now is evolving to help in between episodes of care. And I think the next chapter, if we could take some time to get into that, is actually thinking a bit broader about the more fundamental point. If every American had the right care at the right time and in the right setting, barring any other technological innovation, we would save like 30% on the dollar. We're starting to see the emergence of new navigation tools that would help people render those kinds of decisions. Look, if Netflix can recommend for me what movie I might want to watch, right, there will be a market emerging for new products and services that will say to me, hey, we think you're likely to have a condition that's going to put you at greater illness. And so if you take a few extra steps now, or you see a physical therapist before your back hurts so much that you need to have a spine surgeon take a look at you, that may actually be the next chapter, how we harvest the power of information technology to make sure that folks persuade them to take better care, finding the right settings at the right time. So in the visit, in between visits, and eventually this larger navigation question, a huge opportunity to apply information technology.
Let me just pick up on that, because there's a great point there, Anish. Dr. Bob Jesse, who's the Deputy Undersecretary for Health at the VA, every time he does a speech, points out that the main determinant in your health is whether or not you follow the doctor's orders, or what he tells you ought to do for your health. And so actually the VA is building now apps to give to their patients that do those simple things. Did you take your medication this morning? You're supposed to take this medication at 8 a.m. every morning. Did you take it? And just increasing, as you point out, increasing their adherence to following what has been prescribed for them will have a tremendous increase in their health and population health in general, and then that comes back on the cost side of things. We are our own determinant of how healthy we're going to be, largely.
So with respect to costs then, we're in a environment of fiscal restraint or fiscal responsibility being highlighted across the country. How do we continue to leverage health IT and innovate, but in that fiscally more fiscally restrained government environment?
I think the health community in the federal government has been among the most innovative parts of government. I speak from the VA perspective, but remember that the VA was pretty much the leader for years on electronic health records and driving things forward. We have to remember that we're talking about the cost of health care, not the cost of health care IT. One of the things I always found interesting to try to explain to Congress and other folks is that healthcare IT done well has a 10 to 20 times multiplier when you get into the health organization. Health IT at VA today is about $4 billion. Healthcare itself is $60 to $70 billion. So that multiplier, as Anish pointed out in the beginning, is pretty substantial. And so, how do we integrate with the new things coming out? How do you utilize those things? How do you let private sector do its innovation? And as government, figure out how you incorporate that in a very productive fashion, I think is an important piece of this. There's a lot of small innovations, and we have to be able to embrace those quickly in the government and build an environment where they can be embraced quickly versus that megalithic, we built a multi-billion-dollar system and it's going to solve all problems for the next 10 years. That doesn't work in healthcare anymore. It's very small innovations happening at a very, very rapid pace.
Tom, I'd like to build on what Roger said and suggest to you that the underlying goal is really productivity growth.
Okay.
And in the 80s and 90s and today, overwhelmingly, the productivity equation in healthcare, governed largely by a fee-for-service reimbursement environment, has been how do you achieve more visits in the time allotted? So the very best of information technology in a fee-for-service environment really is about optimizing your schedule.
Right.
And frankly, maximizing your dollar value per visit, i.e. making sure you're getting paid full due what your services were for the time you spent. So as I spent like a decade of my life in the healthcare sort of research and best practices space with my old friends at the advisory board company, I used to study this and say that, well, we were pretty productive in the weaponry that was the investment of choice in the fee-for-service era had been largely around revenue cycle, and you could almost point out where the next wave of weaponry was coming, because the payers would buy really sophisticated analytic software to deny the claim, and then the hospitals would buy the very sophisticated software to predict the likelihood of a denied claim to then reverse and build back and fight over it. And so very, very sophisticated information technology products to improve the productivity when the measure of output was this sort of fee-for-service reimbursement environment. So scheduling optimization, revenue cycle, we've seen pretty good returns, if you will, on the power of health IT to drive productivity. You're asking now a more fundamental question, which is how do we achieve a new model of productivity, which is to improve the outcomes of a population for a lower and lower cost. And if you think about that shift, that's a new reimbursement methodology. That is a methodology that sets the winners as those who can achieve more clinical outcome for the dollar spent. Now we need a completely different set of tools. You know, when I was on the transition team for President Obama before we took office, and there was a big debate about how to advise the transition team on the health IT package. And it was a very, very important point to make during that deliberation, that if this was all about the adoption of a specific set of capabilities that are largely in the market today, we would largely be underwriting tools that are very productive on the billing and the scheduling and the revenue cycle side of the equation, but we're really early on the broader population health. And that the real objective was to drive towards productivity growth on the fee-for-outcomes model, a reimbursement model that hadn't really been at scale and had no real immediate path to getting to scale, but we anticipated. In fact, when I was writing the book, I went back into the old documents, you know, the team that was put together on that initial transition effort. My later deputy, Danny Weitzner, had the pen. My successor, Todd Park, was on the team. Farzad Mostashari, who ultimately became ONC coordinator, and Peter Bash, a wonderfully talented physician right here in the D.C. area at MedStar, really understanding the potential to solve population health and to get to that fee-for-outcomes world by using information technology to drive productivity. In those initial documents, we wrote very emphatically that the goal is health improvement. The productivity equation needs to be applying information technology to achieve productivity growth. MIT had done a study outside of healthcare, just a broad study that said, how do you drive productivity growth in an industry sector? And the answer is, quote, data-driven decision-making.
Right.
The use of information in a given industry sector can boost productivity 6%. So I think the real interesting storyline is to achieve cost and quality improvement, your point about fiscal constraint, the best thing we can do is accelerate the pace at which we move to fee-for-outcome to drive those productivity incentives, which then will unearth even more new capabilities around care coordination, patient engagement, and other capabilities really tied to the needs of that reimbursement culture more so than are still largely fee-for-service culture today. So that's the journey I think we're on and why I'm so bullish that this is the decade we're going to make a meaningful dent in the industry.
Excellent. Thank you. It's I want to get into that more in the second segment. You're listening to the Advancing Healthcare Transformation with Health IT, sponsored by HIMSS on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.